Mia adjusted the lens of the antique camera she had purchased earlier that day, turning it gently in her hands. The brass casing was scratched, its once shiny surface dulled by years of neglect. Still, there was something about it, a weight, a story, that made it irresistible. The vendor's cryptic words echoed in her mind. This camera sees more than it should. Mia smirked, brushing it off as a sales pitch. She was no stranger to odd trinkets, often collecting them for her blog on forgotten relics and their histories. This camera, however, felt different. Sitting at her cluttered desk in her tiny apartment, she examined the camera more closely. A faint engraving on its side caught her eye, nearly hidden beneath layers of grime. She ran her thumb over it, squinting to make out the words, per aspera ad veritatem, Latin. Through hardships to the truth. Dramatic, she muttered, setting the camera down. Still, her curiosity refused to wane. She decided to open it. Sliding the latch, the film compartment popped loose with a soft click. To her surprise, an old reel of film tumbled into her lap. It looked brittle, its edges slightly curled, but it was intact. Mia's stomach tightened with excitement. She grabbed her film viewer, an old tool she kept for moments like this. The room darkened as she threaded the reel and switched on the projector. The hum of the machine filled the air, and a flickering image appeared on the wall. At first, the footage seemed ordinary. A coastal town bathed in sunlight, its streets lined with weathered houses. Children played on a beach, their laughter silent in the grainy images. Then the scene shifted, a storm rolled in, dark clouds gathering over a jagged cliff. At the cliff's edge stood a lighthouse, its windows dark and uninviting. The frame jumped, and a figure appeared. They were standing directly in front of the camera, their face obscured by shadows. The figure leaned closer, their voice faint but urgent. "If you've found this," they began, their words distorted by the crackling film, "you're closer than you think. The artifact must not fall into the wrong hands. Go to the lighthouse, but beware, the shadows are watching." The screen went black. Mia sat frozen, her heart pounding. The lighthouse was unmistakable, Sentinel Point, an abandoned structure just outside of town. It had been the subject of local legends for decades, stories of disappearances, strange lights, and whispers carried on the wind. Her phone buzzed, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was Ethan, her best friend and go-to partner for digging up mysteries. She quickly answered. "Mia," Ethan said, his tone light. "I found something for your blog, an old map of—" "I need your help," she interrupted, her voice steady but urgent. There was a pause. "What's going on?" "I'll explain when you get here," Mia said. "Just trust me, it's big." An hour later, Ethan arrived at her apartment, a puzzled expression on his face. He was carrying his usual leather satchel, packed with notebooks, pens, and other tools of his trade. His love for history often made him the voice of reason in their adventures, though he never shied away from the strange and unexplained. "All right," he said, dropping his bag onto her couch. "What's the emergency?" Mia gestured to the camera and the film reel. "This. Watch." She replayed the footage, her eyes fixed on Ethan's reaction, his brow furrowed as the figure in the film delivered their cryptic message. By the time the screen went black, he was leaning forward, his hands clasped tightly. "That lighthouse," Ethan said slowly. "That's Sentinel Point." Mia nodded. "And the message? What do you make of it?" Ethan rubbed his chin, his mind clearly racing. "It could be a hoax, someone trying to drum up interest in the lighthouse or mess with people like us." "Maybe," Mia said, though her gut told her otherwise. "But what if it's real? What if there's actually something hidden out there?" Ethan sighed, his practical side warring with his curiosity. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Mia nodded. "I am. Ethan, this could be huge. And even if it's nothing, wouldn't you rather know than wonder?" He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Fine, but if we're doing this, we do it right. Research first. We need to know everything about that lighthouse before we go poking around. Mia grinned, her excitement bubbling to the surface. I knew I could count on you. The two spent the next few hours scouring the internet for information about Sentinel Point. It had been built in the late 1800s and decommissioned in the 1970s after several unexplained incidents. Reports of strange lights, sudden power failures, and eerie sounds had plagued the area for decades. The most unsettling detail, however, was the disappearance of its last keeper, Harold Grayson, who had vanished without a trace in 1974. What do you think happened to him? Mia asked, scrolling through an old newspaper article. Ethan shrugged. Could be anything. Maybe he fell, or maybe he just walked away. People disappear all the time. Mia frowned. But why leave a cryptic message on film? And what about this artifact? If it's real, why hasn't anyone found it? Ethan didn't have an answer. Instead, he closed his laptop and looked at Mia. We won't figure it out sitting here. Tomorrow we head to Sentinel Point. The next morning, the pair stood at the edge of the cliffs overlooking the lighthouse. The structure loomed in the distance, its once proud frame weathered by decades of wind and salt. Waves crashed against the rocks below, and the air was thick with the scent of sea spray. This place is unsettling, Ethan admitted as they made their way down the narrow path leading to the lighthouse. Mia glanced at him, her determination unwavering. Let's just find out what's inside. As they approached the lighthouse, a chill ran down Mia's spine. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. She pushed it open and the two stepped into the dim interior. The air was heavy, thick with dust and the faint scent of decay. Broken furniture and scattered papers littered the floor. At the far end of the room, a spiral staircase wound upward into darkness. Ethan shone his flashlight around the space, his voice low. Looks like no one's been here in years. Mia stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. Something glinted in the corner, catching her attention. She crouched down, brushing away the dust to reveal a small metal box. It was locked, but the engraving on its surface was unmistakable. Per aspera ad veritatem. It's the same as the camera, she whispered, holding it up for Ethan to see. Before he could respond, a faint whisper echoed through the room, sending a shiver down their spines. Did you hear that? Ethan asked, his flashlight shaking slightly. Mia nodded, her pulse racing. Let's get this open and figure out what's going on. The metal box felt heavier than it looked, its cold surface covered in intricate engravings that mirrored those on the antique camera. Mia and Ethan stared at it, the silence between them charged with anticipation. Do you think it's a clue? Mia whispered, her fingers tracing the worn Latin inscription, Per aspera ad veritatem, through hardships to the truth. Ethan nodded, though his focus was on the faintly rusted lock keeping the box sealed. If it's connected to the camera, it could be the next piece of the puzzle. We need to open it. Mia reached into her bag and pulled out a small multi-tool. She fiddled with the lock, the sound of scraping metal breaking the stillness. After a few tense moments, the lock clicked open. Taking a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was a folded piece of parchment and a strange key. The parchment crinkled as she carefully unfolded it, revealing a hand-drawn map. Ethan leaned in, his brow furrowing. It's a map of the coast, he said, pointing to the markings. This path here leads to an old boathouse. Mia turned the key over in her hand. It was ornate, shaped like a lighthouse, with tiny engravings of waves along its shaft. Looks like the boathouse is our next stop. Ethan studied the map again, his voice hesitant. This map is old, Mia. The boathouse might not even be standing anymore. Mia grinned, tucking the key into her pocket. Only one way to find out. The journey to the boathouse took the better part of the afternoon. The sun hung low on the horizon as they navigated narrow trails along the rocky coastline. The salty breeze carried the sound of crashing waves, and seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing in the emptiness. As they neared the boathouse's marked location, they saw it, or what was left of it. The structure was barely standing, its roof collapsed and its walls covered in thick layers of moss. A rickety dock jutted out over the churning water, swaying slightly with each wave. Safe to say no one's been here in decades, Ethan muttered, adjusting his bag. Mia stepped cautiously onto the creaking wooden planks. If the lighthouse keeper left the map, he must have hidden something here. The boathouse door was barely hanging on its hinges. Mia pushed it open, revealing a dark, damp interior filled with rusting tools and rotting wooden crates. Ethan's flashlight swept over the space, illuminating cobwebs and scattered debris. "Look for anything that might match the key," Mia said, already combing through a pile of old nets and tarps. Ethan's light fell on a large chest tucked against the far wall. "Here," he called, beckoning her over. The chest was sturdy, its iron lock rusted but intact. The engravings on its surface were familiar, waves and stars like those on the key. Mia knelt in front of it, pulling the lighthouse-shaped key from her pocket. "It has to be for this," she said, sliding the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, and the chest opened with a creak. Inside, nestled among layers of tattered cloth, was another map, this one more detailed than the first. Beside it was a small leather-bound journal. Ethan picked it up, thumbing through its fragile pages. "It's a logbook," he said, scanning the faded handwriting. "It belonged to Harold Grayson, the lighthouse keeper." Mia's heart raced. "What does it say?" Ethan paused, reading aloud. "The artifact's power is greater than I imagined. The shadows grow stronger with each passing day. I've hidden it where the light cannot reach, in the Island of Echoes. Only those who follow the true path will find it." "The Island of Echoes," Mia repeated, her voice tinged with awe. "That must be where the artifact is." Ethan traced the map with his finger. "It's marked here. It's a remote island, miles from shore. We'll need a boat." Mia looked at him, determination shining in her eyes. "Then we find one." Back in town, Mia and Ethan searched for someone willing to take them to the Island of Echoes. It wasn't easy. Most locals avoided the area, citing dangerous waters and the island's eerie reputation. Stories of ghostly whispers and mysterious disappearances kept even the most seasoned sailors away. After hours of asking around, they found a willing captain, a gruff man named Callum, whose weathered face and salt-streaked beard hinted at a life spent battling the sea. "You want to go to the Island of Echoes?" Callum asked, his voice rough and incredulous. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you'd better have more than guts to survive out there." "We can pay," Mia said, holding up a wad of cash. Callum eyed them both, then nodded. "Be at the dock tomorrow morning, first light." The next morning, the sky was overcast as they boarded Callum's small fishing boat. The sea was restless, waves slapping against the hull as they set out toward the horizon. Callum stood at the helm, his sharp eyes scanning the waters ahead. "People say the island's cursed," he said over the roar of the wind. "Don't know if I believe in curses, but I've seen enough strange things to keep my distance." Ethan leaned against the railing, his expression thoughtful. "What kind of strange things?" Callum shrugged. "Lights in the sky, voices calling from the water. Some say it's the ghosts of those who went looking for the island and never came back." Mia shivered, though she tried to hide it. "Well, we're coming back, and we're going to find what we're looking for." Callum chuckled darkly. "We'll see about that." As they neared the island, the sea grew rougher. The boat rocked violently, waves crashing over the sides. Thick fog rolled in, obscuring the shoreline. Callum slowed the boat, his movements careful and deliberate. "There it is," he said, pointing to a shadowy outline in the mist. "The Island of Echoes." Mia and Ethan peered through the fog, their breath catching. The island loomed ahead, its jagged cliffs rising like sentinels from the churning water. Dense forest covered its surface, and in the distance they could just make out the ruins of an old stone structure. Callum dropped anchor, his expression grim. "This is as far as I go. You two are on your own from here." Mia and Ethan nodded, lowering a small dinghy into the water. As they rowed toward the island, the air grew colder and the sound of the waves seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness. They reached the shore, pulling the dinghy onto the rocky beach. The forest ahead was dense and unwelcoming, its twisted trees casting long shadows over the ground. Ethan adjusted his pack, his voice steady. "This is it. No turning back now." Mia nodded, gripping the map tightly. "Let's find the artifact." As they stepped into the forest, a faint whisper carried on the wind, sending a chill down their spines. "Beware the shadows." The forest on the island of Echoes seemed alive, its twisted branches clawing at the fog-drenched air. Mia and Ethan moved cautiously, the crunch of their boots on the damp undergrowth the only sound breaking the eerie silence. The map they had found in the lighthouse guided them through the dense maze of trees, though the markings were vague at best. "This place is like something out of a nightmare," Ethan muttered, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Mia stopped to study the map, her fingers tracing the faded lines. "It's leading us toward the center of the island. There's supposed to be some kind of clearing there." Ethan adjusted his pack, his voice low. "Let's just hope we're not walking into a trap." They pressed on, the trees growing thicker and the light dimmer as they ventured deeper. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Mia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every now and then she glanced over her shoulder, but the forest remained still. After what felt like hours, they reached a break in the trees. Before them lay a clearing, its ground covered in strange, intricate patterns etched into the dirt. At the center stood a stone pedestal, its surface weathered but intact. Symbols carved into the pedestal's sides glowed faintly, their light pulsing in time with Mia's racing heartbeat. "This has to be it," Mia whispered, stepping forward. Ethan grabbed her arm, his eyes narrowing. "Wait, look at the ground." Mia followed his gaze. The patterns in the dirt weren't random. They formed a labyrinthine design with the pedestal at its center. "A labyrinth," she said, her voice tinged with awe. Ethan nodded. "It's a test. The map mentioned that the path to the artifact wouldn't be straightforward." Mia knelt to examine the patterns more closely. The labyrinth wasn't just a design, it was a puzzle. Small, circular grooves lined the paths, each one containing a fragment of stone or crystal. "These pieces must fit together somehow," she said. "We need to complete the pattern." The two worked methodically, moving from one section of the labyrinth to the next. Each fragment they collected had a unique shape and color, but as they pieced them together, a larger picture began to emerge. The design depicted a lighthouse surrounded by swirling waves, with a single glowing star above it. As Mia placed the final fragment, the labyrinth lit up, the symbols on the pedestal flaring brighter. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, and the ground beneath them trembled. Ethan stepped back, his hand on his flashlight. "What's happening?" The pedestal shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, circular disc made of polished obsidian, its surface engraved with more glowing symbols. Mia picked it up, the cold, smooth surface sending a shiver through her. "This must be the next clue," she said, holding it up for Ethan to see. Before he could respond, a low whisper echoed through the clearing. It wasn't the wind, it was deliberate, carrying words that neither of them could fully understand. "Did you hear that?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. Mia nodded, clutching the disc. "We're not alone." The whispers grew louder, forming an unintelligible chorus that seemed to come from all directions. Shadows shifted at the edges of the clearing, moving unnaturally against the faint light of the labyrinth. "Run," Ethan said, his voice firm but calm. Mia didn't argue. They sprinted back into the forest, the whispers following them like a living thing. The shadows seemed to stretch toward them, their dark tendrils curling around the trees. As they ran, the forest seemed to close in, the path they had taken disappearing behind them. Ethan grabbed Mia's arm, pulling her to a stop. "We're going in circles." Mia glanced at the disc in her hand, its symbols glowing faintly. "Maybe it can guide us." She held it up, and the symbols flared brighter, casting beams of light in multiple directions. One beam was stronger than the others, pointing toward a faintly visible trail. "This way," she said, tugging Ethan along. The trail led them to a cave hidden beneath a rocky outcrop. The entrance was narrow and jagged, almost as if the earth itself was trying to swallow it. The whispers faded as they stepped inside, replaced by the sound of dripping water and the faint hum of energy. The cave walls were lined with more carvings, similar to those they had seen on the pedestal. At the far end of the chamber was another pedestal, this one taller and more ornate. Atop it rested a large crystal orb, its surface swirling with golden light. Mia approached cautiously, the disk in her hand pulsing in time with the orb. "This must be part of the artifact," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Ethan frowned, his gaze darting around the cave. If this is here, then why did Grayson's journal talk about a central artifact on the island? This can't be all of it. Mia placed the disk on the pedestal. The orb flared to life, projecting an image of the island into the air above them. The projection zoomed in on another part of the island, highlighting a massive stone temple hidden deep within the forest. "That's where we need to go," Mia said, her determination growing. Ethan nodded, though his expression remained wary. "But we're not the only ones looking for this. If Marcus or anyone else is on the island, they'll be heading there too." Mia met his gaze, her voice steady. "Then we'll get there first." As they left the cave, the whispers returned, but this time they were fainter, more distant. The disk's light guided them back toward the main trail, its glow steady and reassuring. The sun was setting as they emerged from the forest, casting the island in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, the silhouette of the temple rose against the horizon, its massive stone walls a testament to its ancient origins. Mia tightened her grip on her bag, her resolve unshaken. "The artifact is close. I can feel it." Ethan nodded, though the weight of the journey ahead was clear in his eyes. "Let's just hope we're ready for what comes next." As they began their trek toward the temple, the wind carried a final whisper, softer than before but unmistakable. "The shadows are watching." The Island of Echoes. The towering silhouette of the stone temple loomed in the distance, its jagged outline cutting through the misty horizon. Mia and Ethan trekked through the dense forest, their breaths visible in the cool evening air. The forest had grown eerily quiet, as if holding its breath, waiting for them to make their next move. The disk in Mia's hand glowed faintly, its light illuminating a faint path through the underbrush. It pulsed with a quiet rhythm, as though it were alive, guiding them toward the temple. Ethan walked a few steps behind, his hand resting on the strap of his pack, ready for anything. "How old do you think this temple is?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan adjusted his pack, scanning the trees around them. "Judging by the carvings we've seen, it could be thousands of years old, maybe older. Whatever civilization built it, they knew things we can't even imagine." Mia nodded, her grip on the disc tightening. "And they left something behind, something powerful. Powerful enough to attract Marcus and his people," Ethan added, his tone grim. As they pushed forward, the trees began to thin and the ground beneath them turned to uneven stone. They stepped into a wide clearing, and there it was, the temple, standing tall and defiant against the encroaching forest. Its weathered stone walls were covered in intricate carvings of stars, waves, and labyrinths. Massive columns framed the entrance, each one engraved with symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air here felt heavier, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Mia's neck stand on end. She approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. "This place feels alive," she murmured. Ethan studied the carvings, his flashlight tracing the patterns. "It's like the labyrinth's energy is concentrated here. This must be the heart of the island." Mia glanced at the glowing disk in her hand. Its light flared as she stepped closer to the temple's entrance. "Whatever's in there, the disk is leading us straight to it." The interior of the temple was even more breathtaking. The central chamber was massive, its dome ceiling rising high above them. Faint beams of light filtered through cracks in the stone, illuminating a mosaic on the floor. The mosaic depicted a labyrinth with a glowing orb at its center, surrounded by robed figures holding shards of light. "It's the artifact," Mia said, her voice filled with awe. "This is where it all started." Ethan knelt to examine the mosaic more closely. "These figures, they're holding shards, like the ones we've seen, but look at their faces. They're covered in shadows." Mia's gaze followed his, and a chill ran down her spine. The figures in the mosaic were obscured, their faces dark and indistinct. "Maybe it's symbolic," she said. "A warning about the artifact's power." Ethan stood, his expression thoughtful, or a reminder of what happens to those who try to control it. At the far end of the chamber was another pedestal, similar to the one in the cave, but larger and more ornate. Symbols etched into its surface pulsed faintly, responding to the light of the disk. Mia approached, placing the disk in a circular indentation at the center. The chamber trembled as the symbols flared to life, casting beams of light across the room. The beams converged on the center of the mosaic, and the floor began to shift, revealing a hidden staircase spiraling downward. Ethan peered into the darkness below. "Of course there's a staircase," he muttered. "Why can't it ever be easy?" Mia smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" The descent was steep and treacherous, the air growing colder with each step. The walls were lined with more carvings, depicting scenes of figures holding the artifact, their expressions ranging from awe to despair. The whispers returned, faint but persistent, echoing off the stone. "What do you think they're saying?" Mia asked, her voice barely audible. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know, but it doesn't sound like a warning anymore. It's almost like they're guiding us." The staircase ended in a vast underground chamber. The ceiling was covered in glowing crystals, casting a pale blue light over the space. At the center of the chamber stood a large stone structure resembling an altar. Suspended above it was the artifact. It was breathtaking, a sphere of swirling light and shadow, its surface constantly shifting between gold and deep blue. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched the glowing disk in Mia's hand. "We found it," Mia whispered, her voice filled with awe. Ethan approached cautiously, his eyes fixed on the artifact. "The question is, what do we do with it?" Before Mia could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed through the chamber. They turned to see Marcus and his team entering the room, their weapons drawn. "Well, well," Marcus said, his tone mocking. "Looks like you did all the hard work for us." Mia stepped in front of the altar, her hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The artifact isn't something you can control." Marcus smirked, his eyes gleaming with greed. "That's where you're wrong. Power is meant to be controlled, and now it's mine." Ethan glanced at Mia, his voice low. "We can't let him take it." Mia nodded, her mind racing. She reached for the disk, which flared brighter in her hand. The artifact pulsed in response, its light growing more intense. "You think that little trick will stop me?" Marcus sneered, raising his weapon. But before he could fire, the artifact unleashed a wave of energy that swept through the chamber. Marcus and his team were thrown back, their weapons disintegrating in their hands. The artifact's light grew blinding, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. Mia and Ethan shielded their eyes as the artifact's energy filled the chamber. When the light subsided, the room was silent. Marcus and his team lay unconscious, their bodies surrounded by faintly glowing symbols. The artifact hovered above the altar, its light softer now, almost peaceful. Mia approached cautiously, the disk in her hand pulsing in time with the artifact's glow. "It's waiting for us," she said, her voice steady. Ethan joined her, his expression filled with both awe and trepidation. "Are you sure about this?" Mia nodded. "The artifact isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be protected." Together they placed their hands on the artifact. Its light enveloped them, and for a moment they felt a sense of pure connection, an understanding of the artifact's purpose. It wasn't just a source of power, it was a keeper of balance, a reminder of the consequences of greed and ambition. As the light faded, the artifact dissolved into fragments, scattering throughout the chamber. The glowing symbols on the walls dimmed, and the air grew still. Mia and Ethan stood in silence, their journey finally complete. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. "What happens now?" Ethan asked. Mia smiled faintly. "We've done our part. The artifact is safe, and the labyrinth's secrets will remain hidden." They climbed back to the surface, leaving Marcus and his team behind. The sun was rising as they stepped out of the temple, its golden light washing over the island. "Ready for the next adventure?" Mia asked, her voice light. Ethan chuckled, slinging his pack over his shoulder. "As long as it doesn't involve any more stairs." They laughed, their bond stronger than ever, and set off toward the horizon, leaving the island of echoes and its mysteries behind. The truth. The sunrise painted the island of echoes in warm hues, a stark contrast to the ominous shadows that had haunted Mia and Ethan's journey. The temple was now a quiet sentinel behind them, its secrets locked away once more. But the experience with the artifact lingered in their minds, filling the silence as they retraced their steps back toward the rocky shoreline. Mia stopped at the edge of a small stream, kneeling to wash her hands. She stared at her reflection in the rippling water, her thoughts heavy. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Ethan stood nearby, adjusting his pack. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the distant cliffs. "We kept it out of the wrong hands," he said finally. "That's what matters." "But the artifact," Mia pressed. "It wasn't just a thing, Ethan. It was alive. It felt like it was trying to tell us something." Ethan crouched beside her, his expression serious. "Maybe it was. But some truths aren't meant to be fully understood. The artifact wasn't ours to control, and we honored that." Mia nodded, though her unease remained. "I just hope the fragments stay hidden. Marcus and his people won't stop looking." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let them try. They'll have to go through us first." As they reached the beach, the familiar outline of Callum's fishing boat came into view. The grizzled captain was leaning against the hull, chewing on a piece of dried jerky. He straightened when he saw them, his weathered face betraying a flicker of relief. "Well, I'll be damned," Callum said, tossing the jerky into the sea. "You made it back. Figured I'd have to sail home alone." Mia smirked, though her exhaustion was evident. "Sorry to disappoint." Callum chuckled, motioning for them to climb aboard. "No disappointment here, just glad I don't have to explain why 2 adventurers went missing on my watch." They boarded the boat, their limbs aching with fatigue. As Callum started the engine, Mia glanced back at the island, its jagged cliffs shrouded in mist. A pang of nostalgia hit her. This place had changed them in ways she couldn't yet articulate. "What did you find out there?" Callum asked, his tone casual but curious. Ethan exchanged a glance with Mia. "Answers," he said simply, "and more questions." Callum chuckled again. "Ain't that the way of things? The more you know, the less you understand." The boat ride back to the mainland was uneventful, but the tension between Mia and Ethan grew as they approached the shore. They hadn't discussed what to do next, and the weight of their discovery hung heavily between them. When they docked, Callum waved them off with a wry smile. "Good luck, you two. Whatever you're chasing, I hope it's worth it." Mia and Ethan thanked him before stepping onto the pier, the bustling sounds of the small harbor a sharp contrast to the eerie silence of the island. They made their way to a nearby cafe, their minds racing with possibilities. Over steaming cups of coffee, they spread out the notes, maps, and sketches they had collected during their journey. The fragments of the artifact were gone, but the knowledge they had gained remained, and it was far more dangerous. "This journal," Ethan said, flipping through Harold Grayson's logbook. He knew the artifact couldn't be controlled, but he still spent his life trying to understand it. Why? Mia leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. "Because it's human nature. We're drawn to things we don't understand, even if it destroys us." Ethan nodded, though his expression darkened. "And that's exactly why Marcus won't stop. He won't care about the warnings, the risks, none of it. To him, the artifact is power." Mia drummed her fingers on the table, her mind racing. "Then we need to figure out how to stop him. If he's still on the island, he'll be searching for clues about where the fragments went." Ethan frowned, flipping to the last page of the journal. "The fragments scattered, but the labyrinth's energy ties them together. If someone learns how to manipulate that energy, they could reassemble the artifact. Mia's eyes widened. We need to warn someone. There has to be an organization, a group, anyone who can help keep this hidden. Ethan hesitated, his fingers brushing over the journal's weathered pages. Grayson mentioned something here, a secret society called the Keepers of the Labyrinth. They were tasked with guarding the artifact centuries ago, but there's no proof they still exist. Mia grabbed her laptop, quickly searching for any mention of the Keepers. Articles, obscure forums, and fragments of historical texts filled the screen. They're a myth, she said, scrolling through the results. But so is the artifact. Ethan leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. If they're real, they might be the only ones who know how to keep the artifacts safe. Their research led them to an address in a nearby city, a small library specializing in ancient texts and esoteric studies. It seemed like a dead end, but they had no better leads. The next morning they arrived at the library, its facade weathered but inviting. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old books and leather. The shelves were crammed with volumes on history, mythology, and the occult. A woman in her 60s sat behind the counter, her sharp eyes scanning a yellowed manuscript. She looked up as they approached, her expression curious but guarded. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. Mia hesitated before speaking. "We're looking for information about the Keepers of the Labyrinth." The woman's gaze sharpened, and she set the manuscript aside. "That's not a name you hear often. What's your interest?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "We've found something. Something connected to the labyrinths. If the Keepers are real, we need their help." The woman studied them for a long moment before standing. "Follow me." She led them to a hidden room at the back of the library, its walls lined with shelves holding ancient artifacts and crumbling scrolls. At the center was a table covered in maps, journals, and sketches similar to the ones Mia and Ethan had collected. "My name is Evelyn," the woman said, motioning for them to sit. "And if you're here, it means the labyrinth has chosen you." Mia and Ethan exchanged a glance, their curiosity piqued. "Chosen us for what?" Mia asked. Evelyn sat across from them, her expression grave. "To protect its secrets. The Keepers have existed for centuries, guarding the artifact and ensuring its power doesn't fall into the wrong hands. If the fragments have reawakened, it's because the balance is in danger." Ethan leaned forward. "Marcus is after the artifact. If he finds a way to reassemble it—" "He won't," Evelyn interrupted, her voice firm. "The labyrinth won't allow it. But its defenses aren't infallible. That's why we need people like you." Mia's heart pounded. "You're saying we're part of this now?" Evelyn nodded. "Whether you like it or not, the labyrinth called you for a reason. Now it's up to you to answer." As the day wore on, Evelyn shared the history of the Keepers and the artifact. Mia and Ethan listened intently, their determination growing. They weren't just uncovering a mystery, they were becoming part of something far greater. By the time they left the library, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city streets. Mia looked at Ethan, her eyes bright with purpose. "We're in this together," she said. "Whatever it takes." Ethan smiled, his resolve matching hers. "Always." And as they walked into the fading light, they knew their journey was far from over. The labyrinth's secrets were only beginning to unfold. The chase. The quiet resolve Mia and Ethan had felt when leaving the library didn't last long. By the time they reached their hotel, an uneasy tension had settled between them. The artifact fragments were hidden, but Marcus and his team were still out there and the stakes were rising. Mia threw her bag onto the bed and sat down, flipping through her notes. "Marcus won't stop. Even if the fragments are scattered, he'll find a way to track them down." Ethan leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "He's smart, but he's not working alone." Evelyn mentioned the shadows, the labyrinth's energy. If Marcus has someone who knows how to manipulate that, he's already ahead. Mia's jaw tightened. "Then we need to find him before he finds the fragments." As if on cue, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his eyes narrowing. "Unknown number. Should I answer?" Mia nodded, her pulse quickening. "It could be important." Ethan picked up. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was distorted, crackling with interference. "You're running out of time, Etienne," it said. "The shadows know your path, and they're closing in." Ethan's knuckles whitened around the phone. "Who is this?" The line went dead. He set the phone down slowly, meeting Mia's wide-eyed stare. "That wasn't random." Mia stood pacing. "If they know where we are, we can't stay here. We need to move, and fast." Within minutes, they packed their gear and left the hotel. The night was brisk, the streets lit by flickering lampposts. Mia's mind raced as they walked, her eyes scanning every shadow for signs of movement. "What's our plan?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "First, we get off the grid," Mia replied. "No phones, no traceable transportation. Evelyn said the keepers have safe houses. We'll ask her for help." Ethan hesitated. "Do you trust her? We've only just met her." Mia glanced at him, her expression firm. "I trust the labyrinth. It led us to her for a reason." They reached a small cafe and ducked inside, finding a quiet corner where they could sit unnoticed. Mia pulled out the notebook Evelyn had given them, flipping to the section on keepers' safe houses. A map showed locations across the globe, marked with symbols similar to those they'd seen in the labyrinth. "There's one not far from here," Mia said, tracing a line on the map with her finger. "A town called Ravenswood. We can get there by train." Ethan nodded. "Then we leave tonight." The train station was nearly empty when they arrived. Mia bought tickets using cash, avoiding the ticket machines, and they boarded the late-night train heading north. The carriage was quiet, its dim lighting casting long shadows across the rows of seats. As the train rumbled to life, Mia leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights fade into darkness. Ethan sat beside her, flipping through the journal they had taken from the lighthouse. "Grayson knew more than he let on," Ethan said, his voice breaking the silence. "He wasn't just hiding the artifact. He was studying it, trying to understand the connection between the labyrinth and the people it chooses." Mia turned to him, her interest piqued. "What did he find?" Ethan tapped the journal. "The labyrinth responds to intent. Those with pure motives are guided, but those who seek its power for selfish reasons, it corrupts them." Mia frowned. "Then Marcus is already lost." "Maybe," Ethan said. "Or maybe he thinks he can outsmart it." The train slowed as it approached a station, its brakes screeching. Mia's eyes darted toward the platform where a group of figures in dark clothing waited. Their faces were obscured, and something about their posture sent a chill down her spine. "Ethan," she whispered, nudging him. "Look." Ethan followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "They're here." The figures boarded the train, moving methodically through the carriages. Mia grabbed her bag, her heart pounding. "We need to get off." Ethan nodded, and the two slipped toward the back of the carriage. As the figures moved closer, their low voices carried through the train, though their words were indistinct. The train began moving again, and Mia spotted an emergency exit door at the end of the carriage. She glanced at Ethan. "Do you trust me?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Always." Mia pulled the lever, the emergency alarm blaring as the door slid open. The wind roared as the countryside blurred past. Without a second thought, she jumped, Ethan following close behind. They tumbled onto the grass, rolling to a stop in a ditch beside the tracks. Mia groaned, pushing herself up and brushing dirt from her clothes. "Still trust me?" Ethan coughed, wincing. "That depends. What's next?" Mia pulled out the map, her hands trembling. "Ravenswood is a few miles from here. We can make it before sunrise if we keep moving." Ethan stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Lead the way." The walk to Ravenswood was grueling, the cold night air biting at their exposed skin. The map guided them through winding back roads and overgrown trails, the faint glow of the moon their only light. When they finally reached the town, the first hints of dawn were breaking over the horizon. Ravenswood was small and quiet, its cobblestone streets lined with old-fashioned lampposts. At the center of town stood a stone church, its steeple rising high into the sky. "This is the place," Mia said, consulting the map. "The safe house is beneath the church." They approached cautiously, pushing open the heavy wooden doors. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old wood and candle wax. At the far end of the nave, a spiral staircase led downward. Ethan hesitated. "Do you think Evelyn warned them we'd be coming?" Mia shook her head. "We'll find out soon enough." The staircase led to a hidden chamber, its walls lined with books and artifacts. A man in his 50s stood at the center of the room, his piercing blue eyes studying them as they entered. He was tall and lean, his demeanor both commanding and calm. "You must be Mia and Ethan," he said, his voice steady. "Evelyn told us you'd be coming." Mia stepped forward. "We're looking for help. Marcus is after the artifact and we can't stop him alone." The man nodded. "My name is Gabriel. I'm one of the keepers. If Marcus has aligned himself with the shadows, then he's already begun unraveling the labyrinth's defenses." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Gabriel motioned for them to sit. "The labyrinth isn't just a structure. It's a living force. Its energy protects the fragments, but that energy can be disrupted, corrupted. If Marcus succeeds, he'll rebuild the artifact and bend the labyrinth to his will." Mia's stomach churned. "How do we stop him?" Gabriel's expression hardened. "By finding the remaining fragments before he does. The labyrinth has chosen you for a reason. You're its last line of defense." The artifact's trial. The chamber beneath the church was eerily quiet, the faint hum of energy from the artifacts around them filling the air. Mia and Ethan sat at the long wooden table, their minds racing as Gabriel laid out their next steps. "The labyrinth's energy is tied to the fragments," Gabriel explained, spreading out a map on the table. "Each piece is protected by a trial, a test of intent and resolve. The labyrinth doesn't allow just anyone to claim its power." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes scanning the map. It was marked with several locations across the globe, each connected by intricate lines resembling a labyrinth. "These are the fragment locations?" Gabriel nodded. "The remaining pieces, you've already encountered 2, the golden and blue shards, but there are 3 more." Mia frowned, her finger tracing one of the locations. "And Marcus, how close is he to finding them?" Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Closer than we'd like. He's using shadow manipulators, those who've corrupted the labyrinth's energy to bypass its defenses, but the labyrinth fights back. That's why it called you." Ethan exchanged a glance with Mia. "Then we don't have time to waste." Their first destination was a remote canyon in Morocco. Gabriel explained that the shard hidden there had been dormant for centuries, protected by the harsh desert and a maze-like series of caves. They traveled under the cover of night, taking a private plane arranged by the keepers and landing near a small village at the edge of the canyon. The villagers were wary, their whispers filled with warnings of cursed caves and strange disappearances. But one elder, an old woman named Halima, agreed to guide them part of the way. "This canyon is alive," Halima said as they hiked through the rocky terrain. "It tests those who enter. Some return, changed. Others don't return at all." Mia nodded, her grip on the map tightening. "We're ready." Halima stopped at the entrance to the caves, a dark, yawning opening in the cliffside. "I cannot go further," she said, her voice trembling. "The labyrinth does not welcome outsiders." Ethan offered her a grateful nod. "Thank you for bringing us this far." Inside the caves, the air was cool and damp, the narrow passages illuminated by the faint glow of their flashlights. The walls were covered in carvings, labyrinthine patterns that seemed to twist and shift as they walked. "This place feels alive," Ethan muttered, his voice echoing. Mia studied the patterns, her breath catching. "It's more than alive. It's watching us." They reached a large chamber where the path split into 3 tunnels, each marked with a symbol. The first showed a scale, the second a heart, and the third an eye. A faint hum emanated from the tunnels, filling the air with an almost melodic tone. "It's a trial," Mia said, her voice steady. "We have to choose the right path." Ethan frowned, his flashlight flicking between the symbols. "How do we know which one?" Mia reached for the golden blue disc they had kept from the first artifact chamber. It pulsed faintly in her hand, its light casting shadows on the walls. She held it up to the symbols, and the heart symbol glowed in response. "This one," she said, stepping toward the tunnel. Ethan hesitated. "Are you sure?" Mia glanced back, her expression firm. "The labyrinth hasn't steered us wrong yet." The tunnel narrowed as they descended, the air growing colder. Faint whispers echoed around them, their words indistinct but insistent. At the end of the passage, they entered a circular room with a pedestal at its center. Floating above the pedestal was the shard, a deep crimson crystal, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Mia stepped forward, but the moment her foot touched the stone floor, the chamber shook violently. The pedestal sank into the ground and the walls began to move, twisting and rearranging into a living maze. "It's changing," Ethan shouted, grabbing her arm. "We need to move." The shard's glow flickered, casting beams of light that illuminated parts of the maze. Mia realized it wasn't just a trap, it was another test. "We have to follow the light," she said, pulling Ethan toward the first beam. The maze was relentless, its walls shifting with every step. The shard's light guided them, but the path was far from straightforward. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, whispering doubts and fears. Mia's steps faltered as the whispers grew louder, their words cutting deep. "You're not strong enough," they hissed. "You'll fail like the others." "Mia!" Ethan's voice broke through the noise, pulling her back. He grabbed her hand, his grip grounding her. "Don't listen to them. The labyrinth is testing us, but we've come too far to stop now." Mia nodded, her resolve hardening. Together they pushed forward, following the shard's light through the twisting corridors. At last they reached the heart of the maze, a large open chamber where the shard floated, its light stronger than before. But as they approached, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was Marcus. His face was pale, his eyes darkened by the labyrinth's corruption. "You think you can stop me?" he snarled, his voice echoing unnaturally. "The labyrinth belongs to those strong enough to wield its power." Mia stepped forward, her voice steady. "The labyrinth doesn't belong to anyone. It protects itself from people like you." Marcus raised his hand, and the shadows around him surged forward, forming tendrils that lashed toward Mia and Ethan. They dodged, the tendrils striking the ground with a force that shook the chamber. Ethan grabbed the disc, holding it up as it flared with golden light. The shadows recoiled, their movements faltering. "The labyrinth chose us, Marcus," he said. "You don't stand a chance." Mia seized the moment, reaching for the shard. As her fingers closed around it, the light exploded outward, engulfing the chamber. Marcus let out a scream as the shadows consumed him, and then he was gone. When the light faded, the shard rested in Mia's hand, its glow soft and warm. The maze was gone, replaced by the stillness of the original chamber. Ethan let out a shaky breath. That was too close. Mia nodded, her heart still racing. "But we did it. The labyrinth tested us and we passed." They left the caves, the shards safely tucked away in Mia's pack. As they stepped into the sunlight, the canyon seemed quieter, almost peaceful. Ethan looked at Mia, his expression thoughtful. 2 down, 1 to go. Mia smiled faintly, her resolve unshaken. "Let's finish this. Betrayal and redemption." The journey back to the Keeper's safe house was uneventful, but tensions simmered between Mia and Ethan. The crimson shard now rested with the other fragments in Mia's pack, its faint pulse a reminder of the power they carried. Gabriel greeted them at the safe house with a cautious smile, his sharp blue eyes lingering on the pack. "You've done well," he said, his voice steady. 3 shards secured and 1 trial remains. But the closer you get to completing the artifact, the greater the risks. Mia placed the pack on the table, leaning forward with determination. "We've faced Marcus, shadows, and everything the labyrinth has thrown at us. We can handle it." Gabriel's expression darkened. "I admire your confidence, but the labyrinth's final trial isn't about strength. It's about trust, and that can be the hardest test of all." That evening, the group gathered around a map of the final shard's location. It was marked deep within the Himalayas, nestled in a hidden valley rumored to be unreachable without guidance. Gabriel explained the legends surrounding the area, a place of reflection and revelation, where the labyrinth demanded its seekers confront their deepest truths. The last shard is the key to understanding the labyrinth's purpose, Gabriel said. But you won't face this trial alone. I'm coming with you. Mia exchanged a glance with Ethan. Are you sure? We've made it this far. Gabriel held up a hand. The final trial is unlike anything you've experienced. You'll need someone who understands the labyrinth's history and its dangers. Besides, I've spent my life preparing for this moment. It's time. Reluctantly, Mia agreed. All right, but we move fast. Marcus might be gone, but there could be others after the shards. Gabriel nodded, his face unreadable. Then we leave at first light. At the end of the passage, they entered a circular room with a pedestal at its center. Floating above the pedestal was the shard, a deep crimson crystal, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Mia stepped forward, but the moment her foot touched the stone floor, the chamber shook violently. The pedestal sank into the ground and the walls began to move, twisting and rearranging into a living maze. It's changing, Ethan shouted, grabbing her arm. We need to move. The shard's glow flickered, casting beams of light that illuminated parts of the maze. Mia realized it wasn't just a trap, it was another test. We have to follow the light, she said, pulling Ethan toward the first beam. The maze was relentless, its walls shifting with every step. The shard's light guided them, but the path was far from straightforward. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, whispering doubts and fears. Mia's steps faltered as the whispers grew louder, their words cutting deep. You're not strong enough, they hissed. You'll fail like the others. Mia! Ethan's voice broke through the noise, pulling her back. He grabbed her hand, his grip grounding her. Don't listen to them. The labyrinth is testing us, but we've come too far to stop now. Mia nodded, her resolve hardening. Together they pushed forward, following the shard's light through the twisting corridors. At last they reached the heart of the maze, a large open chamber where the shard floated, its light stronger than before. But as they approached, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was Marcus. His face was pale, his eyes darkened by the labyrinth's corruption. You think you can stop me? He snarled, his voice echoing unnaturally. The labyrinth belongs to those strong enough to wield its power. Mia stepped forward, her voice steady. The labyrinth doesn't belong to anyone. It protects itself from people like you. Marcus raised his hand, and the shadows around him surged forward, forming tendrils that lashed toward Mia and Ethan. They dodged, the tendrils striking the ground with a force that shook the chamber. Ethan grabbed the disc, holding it up as it flared with golden light. The shadows recoiled, their movements faltering. The labyrinth chose us, Marcus, he said. You don't stand a chance. Mia seized the moment, reaching for the shard. As her fingers closed around it, the light exploded outward, engulfing the chamber. Marcus let out a scream as the shadows consumed him, and then he was gone. When the light faded, the shard rested in Mia's hand, its glow soft and warm. The maze was gone, replaced by the stillness of the original chamber. Ethan let out a shaky breath. That was too close. Mia nodded, her heart still racing. But we did it. The labyrinth tested us and we passed. They left the caves, the shards safely tucked away in Mia's pack. As they stepped into the sunlight, the canyon seemed quieter, almost peaceful. Ethan looked at Mia, his expression thoughtful. 2 down, 1 to go. Mia smiled faintly, her resolve unshaken. Let's finish this. Betrayal and redemption. The journey back to the keeper's safe house was uneventful, but tensions simmered between Mia and Ethan. The crimson shard now rested with the other fragments in Mia's pack, its faint pulse a reminder of the power they carried. Gabriel greeted them at the safe house with a cautious smile, his sharp blue eyes lingering on the pack. You've done well, he said, his voice steady. 3 shards secured and 1 trial remains. But the closer you get to completing the artifact, the greater the risks. Mia placed the pack on the table, leaning forward with determination. We've faced Marcus, shadows, and everything the labyrinth has thrown at us. We can handle it. Gabriel's expression darkened. I admire your confidence, but the labyrinth's final trial isn't about strength. It's about trust, and that can be the hardest test of all. That evening, the group gathered around a map of the final shard's location. It was marked deep within the Himalayas, nestled in a hidden valley rumored to be unreachable without guidance. Gabriel explained the legends surrounding the area, a place of reflection and revelation, where the labyrinth demanded its seekers confront their deepest truths. The last shard is the key to understanding the labyrinth's purpose, Gabriel said. But you won't face this trial alone. I'm coming with you. Mia exchanged a glance with Ethan. Are you sure? We've made it this far. Gabriel held up a hand. The final trial is unlike anything you've experienced. You'll need someone who understands the labyrinth's history and its dangers. Besides, I've spent my life preparing for this moment. It's time. Reluctantly, Mia agreed. All right, but we move fast. Marcus might be gone, but there could be others after the shards. Gabriel nodded, his face unreadable. Then we leave at first light. The trek to the Himalayas was grueling even with the keeper's resources. After days of travel by plane and truck, they reached the edge of the hidden valley. Snow-covered peaks towered above them, their jagged silhouettes stark against the pale sky. The air was thin and cold, biting at their exposed skin. This is it, Gabriel said, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his face. The labyrinth's heart lies ahead. Mia adjusted her pack, her breath visible in the icy air. The labyrinth feels different here. It's stronger. Ethan nodded, his gaze scanning the cliffs. And more dangerous. They entered the valley through a narrow pass, the walls of ice and stone towering on either side. The path wound downward, leading to a frozen lake at the valley's center. In the distance, a massive stone archway loomed, its surface covered in intricate carvings that shimmered faintly in the dim light. This is the entrance, Gabriel said, stopping at the edge of the lake. Once we cross, there's no turning back. Mia stared at the archway, her stomach tightening. The shards in her pack pulsed faintly, as if sensing the proximity of their final piece. Let's finish this. The frozen lake was eerily silent as they crossed, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint whispers they had come to associate with the labyrinth began to swirl around them. When they reached the archway, the ground beneath them trembled. A deep, resonant hum filled the air as the carvings flared to life, casting beams of light that converged on a single point ahead. The light revealed a staircase descending into the earth. Gabriel turned to Mia and Ethan, his expression grave. The labyrinth is awakening. This is where the trial begins. The staircase led to a vast underground chamber, its walls lined with glowing crystals that pulsed in time with the shards. At the center of the chamber was a pedestal, and atop it rested the final shard, a radiant white crystal that seemed to glow with an inner light. Mia approached cautiously, the shards in her pack reacting to the shard on the pedestal. But before she could reach it, Gabriel stepped forward, blocking her path. Gabriel? Mia asked, her voice filled with confusion. What are you doing? Gabriel's calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold intensity. You've done well to get this far, he said. But the labyrinth's power isn't meant for just anyone. It belongs to the keepers, and I will ensure it stays that way. Ethan stepped forward, his fists clenched. What are you talking about? We're on the same side. Gabriel shook his head. You don't understand. The labyrinth isn't just a protector, it's a weapon. In the wrong hands, it could destroy entire civilizations, but in the right hands, it could reshape the world. Mia's eyes widened as realization dawned. You want to control it. Gabriel's lips curved into a faint smile. Someone has to. Before Mia and Ethan could react, Gabriel raised his hand and the chamber's energy flared. The glowing crystals shattered, sending shards flying through the air. Shadows surged from the walls, forming tendrils that lashed toward Mia and Ethan. Ethan grabbed Mia's arm, pulling her back. We need to stop him. Mia nodded, her mind racing. She reached into her pack, pulling out the shards they had collected. Their light flared, pushing back the shadows as she stepped toward Gabriel. "You don't understand the labyrinth's purpose," she said, her voice steady. "It's not meant to be controlled. It's meant to protect." Gabriel's smile faded. "Then prove it." The final trial began. The chamber twisted around them, the walls shifting into a maze of light and shadow. Gabriel disappeared into the labyrinth, his laughter echoing in the distance. Mia and Ethan moved together, the shard's light guiding them through the maze. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, testing their resolve. At every turn, the labyrinth forced them to confront their fears and doubts. Ethan paused as a shadowy figure emerged in his path, a mirror image of himself, but filled with anger and regret. The figure spoke, its voice harsh. "You'll never be enough. You'll always fail." Ethan clenched his fists, his voice steady. "Maybe I will, but I'll keep trying." The shadow dissolved and the path opened ahead. Mia faced her own trial, a vision of her family, their faces filled with disappointment. "You're wasting your life chasing myths," they said. "You'll never find what you're looking for." Mia's heart ached, but she stood tall. "I've already found it, and I won't stop now." The vision faded and she stepped forward. At the heart of the maze, they found Gabriel, the final shard in his hands. The labyrinth's energy swirled around him, his expression one of triumph. "You can't stop me," he said, his voice echoing. "The labyrinth has already chosen me." Mia held up the other shards, their combined light filling the chamber. The labyrinth chooses those who protect, not control. The shard's light grew blinding and the labyrinth responded. The shadows recoiled and Gabriel cried out as the final shard slipped from his grasp. Mia caught it, the energy of all the shards merging into a brilliant orb. The labyrinth trembled, its power stabilizing. Gabriel fell to his knees, defeated. As the chamber settled, the orb floated above the pedestal, its light soft and warm. The labyrinth's whispers grew faint, replaced by a profound silence. Mia and Ethan stood together, their bond stronger than ever. They had passed the final trial, and the labyrinth had trusted them with its secrets. Gabriel looked up, his voice trembling. "What will you do with it?" Mia smiled faintly. "We'll protect it, like the labyrinth always intended." The final trial. The glowing orb floated gently above the pedestal, pulsing with a serene light that seemed to breathe life into the chamber. The air was still, yet charged with energy, a sense of culmination, as though the labyrinth itself was waiting for their final decision. Mia and Ethan stood at the center of the room, their hands clasped together, the fragments of their journey finally complete. Gabriel knelt a few steps away, his face etched with defeat and lingering desperation. "You have no idea what you're holding," he said, his voice cracking. "The labyrinth's power could reshape the world. Don't let it go to waste." Mia glanced at Ethan, her expression resolute. "This isn't about reshaping anything, it's about keeping the labyrinth's balance intact." Ethan nodded, stepping closer to the orb. "We've seen what happens when people try to control the labyrinth, the shadows, the corruption. It's not meant to be wielded." Gabriel staggered to his feet, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and anger. "And who decides that? You, the keepers? You've been chosen, but that doesn't make you immune to the labyrinth's tests." Mia raised the glowing shards in her hands, their light intensifying. "That's why it's a trial, Gabriel. The labyrinth doesn't need to be controlled. It needs to be trusted." The orb began to shift, its golden light deepening into shades of blue and violet. The labyrinth responded, the walls of the chamber trembling as the orb's energy radiated outward. The carvings on the walls glowed brighter, casting intricate patterns across the room. From the orb emerged a faint spectral figure, its form fluid and undefined. It spoke without words, its presence filling their minds with a calm yet commanding voice. "The artifact is complete, but the choice remains, to protect or to control. Your intent will determine the labyrinth's future." Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "We've seen the damage caused by those who seek control. The labyrinth is a guardian, not a weapon." Gabriel shook his head, his voice rising in desperation. "You're throwing away a chance to save humanity. to reshape its fate. The spectral figure turned to Gabriel, its voice resonating with a quiet power. You seek salvation through dominance. The labyrinth does not serve those who seek only power. Mia placed her hand on the orb, her voice firm. We choose to protect it, to ensure that no one can use it for harm. The orb pulsed once and the chamber's light dimmed. The spectral figure faded, leaving behind a profound silence. The shards in Mia's hands dissolved into streams of light, merging with the orb as it rose higher into the air. The labyrinth responded, its walls shifting one final time. The room transformed into a vast open space, the ceiling giving way to reveal the night sky. Stars twinkled above them, their light mirrored in the orb's radiant glow. The voice of the labyrinth returned, softer now. The balance is restored. The labyrinth's guardianship will continue. Mia and Ethan watched as the orb began to fade, its light dispersing into countless fragments that scattered across the sky. The labyrinth had chosen its path, and its secrets were safe once more. Gabriel slumped against the wall, his face pale. "You've sealed it away," he said, his voice hollow. "Do you realize what you've done?" Mia turned to him, her expression calm but unwavering. "We've protected the labyrinth just as it wanted. That's all that matters." Ethan stepped forward, his tone firm. "The labyrinth isn't ours to control, or yours. It's meant to guide, not destroy." Gabriel shook his head but said nothing. The weight of his failure was evident in his slumped shoulders and downcast gaze. As the chamber settled into silence, a staircase formed at the far end of the room, leading upward. Mia and Ethan exchanged a glance, their bond stronger than ever. "This is it," Mia said softly. "The labyrinth is letting us go." Ethan smiled faintly. "We did what we came here to do." They climbed the staircase together, the faint whispers of the labyrinth growing fainter with each step. When they emerged at the surface, dawn was breaking, painting the Himalayan peaks in hues of gold and pink. The valley below was quiet, untouched, as if the labyrinth had never been disturbed. They descended into the valley, the weight of their journey lifting with each step. The Keeper's extraction team was waiting at the edge of the pass, their faces filled with relief as Mia and Ethan approached. Gabriel trailed behind them, his demeanor subdued. One of the Keepers approached him, but he waved them off, walking silently toward the waiting vehicles. Mia turned to Ethan, her voice low. "What happens to him now?" Ethan shrugged. "That's up to the Keepers, but I think the labyrinth taught him a lesson he won't forget." The return to the Keeper's safe house was quiet, the tension of their journey giving way to a deep sense of accomplishment. Evelyn greeted them at the door, her expression a mix of pride and relief. "You've done what few could," she said, her voice warm. "The labyrinth chose wisely." Mia nodded, her eyes bright. "It wasn't easy, but it was worth it." Ethan smiled, slinging his pack over his shoulder. "The labyrinth's secrets are safe and Marcus is gone. For now, that's enough." Evelyn placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. "The labyrinth will always need guardians. If ever its balance is threatened again, I hope you'll answer its call." Mia exchanged a glance with Ethan, her determination unwavering. "Always." As they left the safe house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. Mia looked at Ethan, a smile tugging at her lips. "Ready for the next adventure?" she asked. Ethan grinned. "Always." They walked into the fading light, their bond stronger than ever, knowing that the labyrinth's trials had changed them forever, and that their journey was far from over. Legacy of the Shadows. The days following their return to the Keeper's safe house were quiet, almost unnervingly so. Mia and Ethan stayed in a small cottage just outside the safe house, their days spent reflecting on the labyrinth's trials and the journey that had brought them to this point. The artifacts were gone, scattered by the labyrinth itself, and their mission was complete. Yet the weight of what they had experienced lingered, as though the labyrinth's whispers were still etched into their minds. Mia sat on the porch one evening, the fading sun casting long shadows across the landscape. She cradled a warm mug of tea in her hands, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Ethan joined her, dropping into the chair beside her with a contented sigh. "You're quiet tonight," he said, glancing at her. Mia smiled faintly. "Just thinking. It feels strange, doesn't it? Like something's missing." Ethan nodded, resting his elbows on his knees. "After everything we've been through, it's hard to just stop." Mia looked at him, her eyes searching. "Do you think we made the right choice? Sealing the artifact, leaving the labyrinth to protect itself?" Ethan's gaze softened. "I do. The labyrinth called us because it needed us to trust it, and we did. That's all it ever wanted." Mia nodded, though the ache in her chest lingered. "I just wonder if it'll ever call us again." The next morning, Evelyn summoned them to the library for a final debrief. The room felt different now, the weight of their shared experiences giving the ancient space a sense of familiarity. "You've done what the keepers couldn't," Evelyn said, her tone warm but measured. "The labyrinth's balance is restored and its secrets are safe, for now." Mia tilted her head. "For now?" Evelyn sighed, leaning against the table. "The labyrinth is a living force, and forces like it are never truly at rest. There will always be those who seek its power, just as there will always be those who are called to protect it." Ethan folded his arms. "And what about Marcus?" Evelyn's gaze darkened. "He's gone for now. The labyrinth's energy rejected him, but people like him don't give up easily. If he resurfaces, we'll be ready." Mia frowned, her fingers brushing over the edge of the table. "And Gabriel, what happens to him?" Evelyn's expression softened. "Gabriel is still one of us, though his judgment was clouded by ambition. He's been given time to reflect, to understand the labyrinth's true purpose. Whether he returns to the keepers or not is up to him." After the meeting, Mia and Ethan found themselves wandering through the nearby woods. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of their recent journey. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Maybe it's time we write this down, not for the world, but for us, so we don't forget." Mia smiled, her steps slowing. "A record of the labyrinth, its trials, and its purpose?" Ethan nodded. "Exactly. A way to remember what we learned about trust, balance, and each other." Mia looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I'd like that." Their departure from the safe house was bittersweet. Evelyn and the keepers wished them well, though their farewell carried an unspoken understanding that their paths might cross again if the labyrinth ever called. As Mia and Ethan drove away, the road winding through the hills, Mia glanced in the rearview mirror. The safe house faded into the distance, but the sense of purpose they had found there remained. "What now?" Ethan asked, his tone light but curious. Mia grinned, her fingers tapping the steering wheel. "Now, we live, we travel, we write, we explore, and maybe, if the labyrinth calls, we answer." Ethan chuckled. "That sounds like a plan." Months later, they sat together in a small cafe overlooking the ocean. Their journals lay open on the table, filled with sketches, maps, and fragments of their story. They spoke in hushed tones, their words carrying the weight of their journey, but also the promise of the future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Mia raised her glass. "To the labyrinth," she said, her voice steady, "and to the light that guides us." Ethan clinked his glass against hers, a warm smile spreading across his face. "To the labyrinth, and to us." And as the first stars appeared in the sky, they knew their story wasn't over. The labyrinth had left its mark on them, its lessons etched into their hearts. But for now, they were content to let the world guide them, trusting that when the time came, they would be ready to face whatever lay ahead. Did you enjoy the thrilling journey through the labyrinth? If you love gripping adventures, mysteries, and stories that keep you on the edge of your seat, don't stop here. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of explorers. What's next? Exclusive content, behind-the-scenes insights, and more incredible tales that will spark your imagination. Subscribe now on Enjoy English and never miss a moment of the action. Let's uncover the next great mystery together.